Good morning. Welcome to the South China Morning Post China Future Tech webinar. China Future Tech is a one-stop mini site for all the S&P reports regarding 6 tech sectors, namely semiconductors, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, aerospace, and biotech. And today's webinar about US-China tech war will focus on the semiconductors and the biotech. Today we are very glad that we have got Gary. Gary is senior economist at Nat6 Corporate Investment Bank with a special interest in technology and the semiconductors. Next to him is Bien. Bien is our production editor who has decades of experience in covering tech in Asia. And also we have Xingmei. Xingmei is an S&P reporter covering the biotech. So the first question goes to you, Gary. So now finally we have some news. China and the US have officially agreed to talk in Switzerland. So what do you expect from these talks? Any results particularly in your mind, and how this is going to affect the so-called tech war between the two countries?
Well, I would say it is a very difficult one because obviously if you compare the relationship of the US versus China or other country, then it will be much easier for the US to reach an agreement, let's say with the UK or India, etc., because the economic interests actually align more. But for the case of China, well, it has been a long-standing stance that the Chinese government is willing to talk to the US, but it needs to be held in the ground that the government is willing to accept. So I think the Switzerland meeting basically shows that, well, at least right now, there's a certain compromise that the two governments will need to make. Because if you think of the pressure or the war between the two biggest powers in the world, for China, the pressure is on employment. For the US, it's on inflation. And we now start to see basically more exemption of different type of goods after this very big tariff announcement. So I think it shows that the pressure is actually pushing the two biggest power to talk, at least. We're not so certain about the outcome because of the complexity of many issues, like the topic we talk about today, technology. But still, I think eventually we will start to see more compromise. There could be a partial deal on certain issues, but it will not be the same as what we see in the round 1 deal, which probably no one remember what is there already.
I still vaguely remember that when China's vice premier was in the White House and Trump was showing this to the whole world. So my follow-up question is: so it seems like you're putting any China-US deal coming the last only after Trump have a deal with other trading partners. Is that so?
Well, I think it's likely that we will end up in that scenario because one thing that the US is trying to do is really to form its own friend circle versus the other Chinese products, right? So I think it's likely that we will see more deals between the US and other countries. And of course, with China, the issue is simply complex because, I mean, the US cannot really force China to depreciate or appreciate the currency. It cannot really, force China to do a lot of measures in different type of deals because it's such a bigger market than many other countries. So I think this is why we will see a very difficult process during the negotiation. It will not be a smooth journey.
Okay. It seems there will be lots of back and forth going on. So Bien, my next question for you is, you have been covering technology for many years. And when actually the fragmentation of the semiconductor supply chain actually started, and also, there's one burning question from our readers is this: how the behavior of the Trump administration is going to make U.S. is a less kind of reliable partner in the supply chain, and how this is going to affect this whole globalized supply chains in terms of chip.
To answer your first question, it all started with the first Trump administration when they, pursued incrementally trade and tech conflict with China and the rest of the world. Obviously, that continued during the Biden administration, and especially with just before the Biden administration left, they did the export control framework for AI diffusion.
Yes.
So that's quite a mouthful, but all it says is that China, North Korea, Iran, Russia, you won't get any tech tech stuff, semiconductors, advanced semiconductors, Japan, South Korea, you're good guys, so we'll give you that. And the latest announcement was that the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, is looking to rescind or revise that framework because it was too complex. But then again, as all this transpired, Beijing pursued efforts to become more self-sufficient in tech. And so talk of decoupling started in the first Trump administration, continued to the Biden administration, and now with the talks, we still don't know what will happen next. But China is prepared. Is prepared, and it's doing all it can. For the semiconductor industry in China, you've got the integrated device manufacturers. Those are like the memory chip makers like Yangtze Memory. And then you have the outsourced semiconductor test and assembly people. And then you have the pure play foundries, SMIC, Huawei Semiconductor. They have not stopped trying to innovate. I think it was in 2024 when then Intel CEO said something about China is about 10 years behind in the semiconductor industry. Well, after all the things we've seen over the past 2 years, I think that timeline has shortened. It's about 5 years now. So China is there on the cusp of actually becoming a real threat, well, a real challenger to the semiconductor crown of the US. And we'll see what will happen during the talks in Switzerland or beyond that. So it's still 4 years of Trump that we will have to endure, and there's still a lot of uncertainty on the table. As for your second question, that's for...
Yeah, because the U.S. used to be like the center of all the supply chains.
Not anymore. When Beijing started to pursue tech self-sufficiency, that meant it's China for China. And we're seeing that in the field of semiconductor design, where a lot of semiconductor designers have really innovated to become less reliant on the more advanced chip making equipment from the West, like ASML. And that will continue, and China will move forward. But it all depends on what concessions will probably be sorted out after the talks with Trump and the Xi administration.
Okay, but they're also like concerned that maybe the trade talks, the tariff talks are temporary, cyclical factors, and the decoupling and the fragmentation of the supply chains are long-term trends.
That's the thing. We didn't have this during other administrations because it was an understanding that the U.S. leads the market, leads the industry. But now, you stepped on the tiger's tail. China is pursuing all it can, and the companies behind it. I'll mention that earlier. Huawei is the champion right now.
Yeah, we were definitely to bring that name.
And then in AI, there's DeepSeek.
Yeah.
Although some people from Anthropic have not so kind words about its innovation, but still, those are the kinds of companies and the kinds of developments that will mark how China will become a more major player in the semiconductor industry.
Thank you. So Xinmei, so from the perspective of biotech industry, in that supply chain, what happened after the tariff war and also this U.S.-China rivalry?
Yeah, very big question, and there's a lot of things that are still very uncertain right now. But one thing that we're definitely already seeing is that global big pharma has already started to invest more in manufacturing in the U.S., which could create some risks for some Chinese firms who, and these are the companies who do contract services, including manufacturing for their global clients, including a lot of them in the U.S. So so maybe just to back up for a second, so there's still no tariff on drugs yet, although the industry is expecting it to happen any day now because Trump has been threatening to extend tariffs to the sector, and his stated goals is the same, to bring manufacturing to the U.S. And we kind of already see global drug makers respond to that. These are the biggest pharmaceutical companies. We have Merck, Eli Lilly, and Roche from Switzerland. They've all said they will kind of expand their manufacturing capacities in the U.S. Of course, it'll take them a very long time to build out these facilities, but still, with that commitment, that could mean potentially fewer opportunities for these Chinese companies. Particularly, the biggest one is Wuxi AppTec, and for Wuxi, even outside of trade, Wuxi AppTec has also become somewhat of a political target in the U.S. for some time now, where their government has been saying that it's they've been saying repeatedly that it's dangerous to have this major Chinese company play a big role in their pharmaceutical supply chain. All right. Just recently, we've also wrote about that. This congressional commission, they wrote a report kind of asking lawmakers to do more about the scary rise of China biotech, right?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yes.
They call them the Huawei of the biotech.
Yes, exactly. And Huawei, of course, famously, which you guys will, of course, talk about more later. But Huawei, in 2019, they were sanctioned, and they pretty much had their smartphone business crippled, right, for a time before they finally got back on its feet. But that's not to say that it's a fair comparison. It could argue that it's questionable because, if anything, Wuxi AppTec is closer to perhaps the Foxconn of the pharmaceutical industry. But that just shows kind of the level of scrutiny that's surrounding this Chinese company, because they are the biggest of all of these Chinese contract service providers. And if the U.S. does decide to go through with, if they do decide to take action against these companies, it would be a pretty bad scenario because they're very dependent on the U.S. market. But as it stands now, for Wuxi particularly, more than 60% of their revenue actually comes from the U.S. market. So, but they've been under the U.S. government's radar for a while now. I'm sure they have done things to prepare for it. They've been trying to diversify their manufacturing locations. So we'll need to see how that plays out.
To where? To like Europe? To Latin America?
Yeah, I think they're being pretty tight-lipped about it, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gary, also being mentioned, one kind of like popular narrative that during the tech war, China is quickly building up its self-sufficiency system in semiconductors. Is that really the case, and how the tariffs are accelerating the process? And also, according to your assessment, where China is now. So some people will say, well, China can produce about like 1/3 of the domestic use chips, and maybe 5 years later it can supply 90%. Is that so optimistic for China?
Well, I would refer to what Jensen Huang said in the U.S.
Yeah.
That many people said is a very diplomatic statement. Is that, well, he thinks that U.S. is leading, so I think no question about that. But China is actually closer than many people may have thought. So, which I also agree from the investment that China has been making in the chip sector, because there are two factors that we can look at in the case of China. The first is that many people may look at the foreign reliance of China, on different equipment and also the export, etc. But let's not forget one point is that U.S. is the biggest R&D spender in the world, around 3.6% GDP.
Yes.
But there's a very big increase also from the case of China since the trade war. We are talking about around 2% in 2018 to right now 2.6%. So where do we put this number? This is actually bigger than the EU 27, both in percentage of GDP and absolute amount. So it means that the trade war has actually accelerated this trend that Chinese firms are investing more on R&D for self-sufficiency. And also another point that we need to look at is that when we see more of this export restriction by the US to China, it means that a lot of Chinese firms, they are basically living in a vacuum of no competition. So if you cannot get the products from the US, what can you do? So it will need to innovate. It will need to produce its products, even though it may not be as good as many of produced by the others right now. So I think this R&D trend and the domestic substitution trend basically is or are fueling what we see right now. So going back to the semiconductor sectors, so I think right now there's still quite a big reliance of Chinese firms on foreign equipment. From our calculation, we do see there's an increase in the self-sufficiency ratio in equipment. I mean, 5-6 years ago, we were talking about maybe somewhere like 3-4%, pretty low, right? Now it is probably above 10%, 10 to 15. A large part still comes from US and then also Japan and Europe. But we do see this growing trend of self-sufficiency. So I think depends on which products that you look at. For me, I think it's hard to say whether it's 10 years, 5 years, etc. But definitely for certain products within the supply chain, we do see a greater development by a lot of Chinese firms in order to replace a lot of the foreign part. I do see this is not something very new from the long economic horizon. China has been doing this. China has been very good in doing this in terms of learning how a product is being made, try to adopt the foreign technology, try to produce itself. This is really not a new story, but the trade war has accelerated that part.
So the next question will be, for China, it's always talking about lacking the chips. So 缺芯, Xing is pronounced the same as hard, and then they use the software, the operating system as a soul. So, but they also consider that once China gets its own hearts and soul, which means the chips and operating system, will that be a completely different, industrial system? Take for EV, for instance. If all the Chinese EV are using China-made chips and China-made systems, will this be there will be US Tesla standard of EV, and then there will be China standard EV, and not only EV. Are we going to see these kind of bifurcation of end products down the road?
Yeah, I think this is why we will begin to see two separate tech ecosystem in the future. One may be dominated by China, the other one led by the US. There will be different countries among the two that will need to decide which one to get into. But EV is a very, very interesting example because in the past we do see this ecosystem which mainly built by maybe not necessarily US car makers, but European car makers, Japanese car makers. You have all the supply chain all the way from the auto part and then different sort of component and then eventually the brand itself. But I think EV is a sector that China is able to really create its own supply chain in a separate system with a separate type of technology and then re-export to the rest of the world. So I think this is why, of course, we also start to see more European car makers. They need to cooperate with Chinese car makers on certain technology. Think of batteries, think of the auto driving system, basically all this component within the supply chain. So for chips, it will be slightly more difficult because of the existing entry barrier and also the tech gap. We're seeing China's getting closer, but it's not really overtaking yet. So, but EV is definitely the example to see how China can actually overtake the rest of the world in a certain sector.
Very good. So Bien, this is also something that I need your experience. Let's talk about Huawei, because speaking of China's self-sufficiency push, Huawei is probably at the center, and also how Huawei has developed from more of distributor of European telecom equipment, becoming such a massive tech giant for China, who plays the central role in building up China's own technology ecosystem. And what are the kind of experiences and lessons along all the way?
Well, if you look at the encyclopedia, so to speak, about being innovative, you can
Yeah.
put Huawei's picture there.
Yeah.
Because actually, they were really been put under the gun in 2019 when they were blacklisted by the US.
Yes.
And, you know, like Shinmei mentioned about the smartphone business, its most profitable operation, that went down the drain. And other manufacturers in China just pushed on ahead. Oppo, Vivo, or even Xiaomi.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2023,
Mm-hmm.
August, Huawei surprised the world by quietly releasing for the domestic market its 5G smartphone,
Mm-hmm.
which they've actually given up on that segment because of the trade sanctions. But with 5G, they developed a comparable advanced 5G chip for that handset, and that has continued, and that's why Huawei is becoming strong again in the domestic market for smartphones. Except that outside, it's not as profitable because it can't use or update Google apps anymore because of the sanctions. And recently, with all the difficulties in the export of advanced chips to China, now it has become a viable alternative to supply advanced graphics processor for AI training and development, for data centers.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the Chinese enterprises can't get enough of the H20 or other GPUs from NVIDIA or advanced micro devices, they have Huawei now as champion.
Mm-hmm.
And Huawei's lead has actually helped other companies in the same industry, semiconductor industry, to raise their potential. Like Nauru has become the leading wafer fabrication equipment supplier in China right now, domestic WFE supplier. So in the same vein as what DeepSeek and Huawei are doing, they're lifting all the boats. They're lifting all their countrymen, all their domestic partners. So following up on what Gary said about a ecosystem, China is doing that right now. Ecosystem for the greater use of advanced semiconductors for their industries. And with China's efforts to pursue deals in Africa, Southeast Asia, and some parts of Europe, we may also see some semiconductor products be involved in trades with those geographic markets. And this proof of China's resiliency was manifested by Huawei in 2023, and it continues up till now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gary, this is brings to the next question, because what Huawei has achieved is exactly the multinational brands have been worried about. For example, when Huawei is doing the telecom equipment, they say, you're very small, you just assemble the different parts together in early 1990s in Shenzhen, a small factory, and then quickly it replaces all the Ericsson, all these equipments. And so, if China builds up this ecosystem, its own tech ecosystem, will foreign companies, multinational companies, today we talk about NVIDIA, talk about Qualcomm, will they still have a role to play? Will there be a place for them at the table, or they will be completely just wiped out of the China market, and they have to face the head-on competition from the powerful China players?
Well, I think it really depends on first the export control, because we never know whether the US will restrict further on different products, because in the US it's actually a bit different from many other countries. Companies sometimes they can actually do something different from what the government is thinking, which is quite different than many other places. So I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the ability or the motivation for American firms to innovate and earn money from the Chinese market. market. So we have seen this multiple times in the past few years on the export restriction already. But having said that, I do think that whether Huawei or any companies alike can completely replace all these US firms also depends on the product qualities that they are able to make, right? And obviously the good advantage that China has is very, very low labor cost, like abundant talent, and also the massive market that can actually fuel the R&D itself and export to the rest of the world. So I would say that China or Chinese firms would be increasingly competitors towards all these Western chip makers. But however, at this juncture, still we don't see China being completely self-reliant yet. So there will still be, certain sort of elements that China will rely on foreign company. So I would put it this way. So the share of revenue of China in all these firms will probably decline in upcoming years, but I wouldn't say that it will go all the way to zero.
So what kind of a time frame are you expecting? I mean, like next 5 to 10 years? Because many people are worried that the day when China can make its own products, basically, it's a day for multinational companies pack up and leave.
Well, I would say 5 years seems to be a reasonable time frame for me for any more significant challenge that may actually come for foreign firms. The reason is that if you look at the chips that, or basically the equipment that China is trying to make, so if you dedicate all the resources, try to make one thing happen, one single machine to work well with a very nice yield, but that is already quite challenging, right? Because when we look at other companies like TSMC, or maybe a bit lower for Samsung, we are talking about a yield level of 95% or above. So at this juncture, I do see that China may be able to have some breakthrough on maybe certain advanced chips right now, but those are still at a relatively small production level with a low yield. The density is not as high as the others. It will improve gradually, but it won't come overnight. So I would say that maybe if we take it to a more security level, then China may be able to produce something similar. But when we're talking about business level, mass production, I think there's still a bit of distance. So I would say that 5 years seems to be like a time frame that I would see China would be able to catch up a bit more.
Okay, yeah. Because for now, China every year spends more in importing ICs than the crude oil. Yeah. So this is also like a big thing for the whole country. So like when we can actually reduce the reliance on imports. But anyway, there's also it's a known fact that China doesn't have access to the world's most advanced production machine, the lithography system from EUV from ASML. But there are also increasing talks that China can actually blaze a different trail, by combining the hardware and the software. Actually, we don't need that kind of machine. We still can produce the advanced chips. That's why, possibly SMIC and possibly Huawei is also trying. And from a technology point of view, like, what's the likelihood for China to have different technology paths in terms of semiconductor?
That's the thing. These segments of the tech industry in China, they're very secretive. So we will not know right now exactly what they're pursuing or their timelines. But based on what Huawei, DeepSeek, Naura, and even YMTC have accomplished recently, they have something in the works. Something's cooking. And when they're prepared, they will show the market what they can do. So, like, for instance, in HiSilicon used to be a very high-profile unit. That's a chip design unit of Huawei.
Yes.
But after the sanctions, the first Trump regime, it quieted down until 2023 when they did that. And as a chip designer, they have to work closely with the foundry. And the first one was supposedly SMICs, and then we don't know what's happening else because Huawei has the resources to actually get facilities set up so that they can have their chips manufactured under their specifications. Obviously, right now, everybody's mum about it, so they're expecting whatever trade talks would accomplish, they would be able to actually, okay, we'll get this product out. That's from an outsider who's been seeing what China is capable of. Like it was mentioned before about a different ecosystem.
Yep.
We have in the smartphone space, when Huawei left, guess who took over? Other Chinese smartphone vendors. Apple, well, they're still there, obviously. But Samsung, it's gone. LG, it's gone. And even the Japanese brands, they're gone.
Yeah.
So that's how competitive the market is. And what they see in the future is to expand, expand, and expand. One more thing. Xiaomi, handset vendor, and other consumer electronics. Now they're making cars. And very impressive cars. Well, save for the crash recently, but yeah, they're doing well. They're doing well. And we can expect that Xi Jinping, as the adult in the conversations in the trade section with the Trump administration, he'll still continue to move forward. I'm confident that China will show the world eventually what they're able to do. But everything right now is in secret until they know the cards, so to speak, of the Trump administration, what they'll show in Switzerland. So we'll see.
Yeah. So, Xinmei, in the biotech sector, do you also see the signs of more innovation on the China side, partly due to external pressure, due to this tech war and trade war?
Right. Well, just for context, one of the reasons that biotech has kind of emerged as this new front of the tech war is that the world has definitely been seeing a lot more innovation coming out of China, and particularly that would be the innovative drugs. Just to share the figure that's been commonly cited, that's so 5 years ago, probably less than 5% of all big pharma transactions involved drugs coming out of China. But last year, that number has jumped to 30%. And that just shows the fast progress that China has made in this sector. One example is that one of the hotter, most highly valued biotech companies in the U.S., Summit Therapeutics, their main asset right now is actually a cancer drug made by a Chinese company named Akeso. Yes. So that's so that just shows the innovation coming out of China. But for the moment, even though they've become much more influential on the global stage, I mean the Chinese biotech companies, tariffs are actually not a huge concern for them right now, mainly because of the way that they access the global market is mainly through licensing out their IPs, their drug candidates to these Western pharmaceutical companies. And that involves an upfront payment and kind of more payments later on based on more commercial milestones. So these kind of commercial deals are not really a part of the tariffs scope. But but still, these drug makers, these Chinese biotech companies, they need to face the similar pressure of potentially rising prices, say in equipment that they use. And the overall decoupling between U.S. and China is definitely also a challenge that they have to face. Excuse me.
Okay, yeah. And for this U.S.-China tech war, it's not only like hot topic in Beijing and Washington. Actually, the whole world is paying close attention to it. So many questions from our readers, also from Latin America, from Southeast Asia. So Gary, when do you think China can actually build up its own ecosystem? For now, the whole world has to buy NVIDIA chips and then use OpenAI, all these kind of things. So this question is, when do you think China will have an AI and app ecosystem wholly independent of US technologies for places like Latin America and Africa?
Well, actually, China has already, I think, built a similar system. Like I think Huawei has done that
Yes.
in purely removing the reliance on Android, trying to have its own OS on the
yes,
new
Harmony
phone.
OS. Today
Yes.
they're launching their new laptop.
That's a new- Yeah.
Pure Harmony OS.
Yeah, so I think definitely we are moving towards that direction. But
Yeah.
for other countries to adopt that also depends on a lot of things, right? Because one thing is having the OS with maybe a very strong ecosystem within China with all the apps, the functionality.
Yes.
But whether China can actually adopt that towards other countries, look at LATAM, look at ASEAN, people may use different sort of software, app, or the consumer behavior may be different. So how China can adopt that together and integrate that with the hardware, like mobile phone and laptop that you mentioned, I think that will be a big challenge that we see. But I wouldn't be surprised that we will start to see more sales from China towards all this country. But whether it can immediately replace Android or Apple, I think it will still take a bit of time, because going back to maybe some of the other sectors, let's say EV that you have mentioned before, it really takes a long time for Chinese firms to market themselves to foreign countries so that the consumers would actually buy that. I would see the same challenge in the mobile phone, which that basically they will need to be a greater effort to actually change that mindset that, okay, this OS developed by Huawei or any other Chinese firms is comparable to the traditional Western one.
Yes, I think one common problem for the Harmony OS going out on smartphone is lack of like the Google suite. They don't have the Google Map or don't have the Gmail, which could be a problem for many consumers that will get used to these technology sets. Yeah, and for this is a question from one Southeast Asia reader. So it's talking about, he was talking about Malaysia. But I guess the whole Southeast Asia country will face a similar situation. Basically to which side to take, and what are the pros and the cons of taking sides with China or the US in terms of tech ecosystems.
For outside China and US markets or North American market, they can actually choose sides, but they can
have both.
Yeah,
okay.
Really. Why corner yourself with a limited choice? There's plenty of options depending on what the trade war gets sorted out. There's plenty of options from U.S. Tech suppliers and Chinese tech suppliers. In my mind, if you want more cost-efficient ways of doing stuff, that would be, Alibaba open source Qwen for AI. Same thing with DeepSeek. For smartphones, same thing. If you can't afford an iPhone, there are plenty of other Android phones from Chinese manufacturers. Same thing with EV. If you're not into Tesla, you can use BYD and all these others. And that's the thing. That's the thing with these new markets for China. I think we had a headline before just saying that is Egypt next for trade, for China, increased trade. Yes, it will all happen. And that is why China is taking advantage of the opportunities right now, because history has taught us, tariff wars are not really good for the economy. And the administration of Xi Jinping knows this. And on that alone, they will pursue expansion and investment in these other markets where probably their products aren't there as much, like in Africa, some parts of Southeast Asia, and some parts of Europe. So for these markets, there's plenty of choice to choose from, plenty of options to choose from, and it's all for the better. This is competition in the market. This is how trade should be done. Let's compete in terms of trade, in terms of marketability, not in terms of getting tariffs high and low and stuff like that.
So it goes beyond the tariffs.
Yes.
It goes beyond the trade talks. What will be, that's also the closing question for this webinar. What will be the end game of US-China tech war? I'm not asking you to predict which side will win, but like how this is going to look like, say, by 2035 in 10 years' time.
Oh, well, we still have up to 4 years of the Trump administration, and so plenty of uncertainty out there, plenty of volatility out there. But the lesson learned from the first Trump administration and this new regime is that let's all be prepared. We cannot put a definite timeline on how things will turn out because talks are still in flux, and all companies, tech companies and semiconductor firms for that matter can do is just trudge on and pursue their goals regardless of what happens next, because right now China has shown the world that hey, we can live under these circumstances anyway. We can pursue new markets, we can innovate some more and become competitive. And they'll do that in the domestic market. This is the China for China stuff, and outside, not necessarily with the US because of their trade dispute. I think Gary would have.
Gary, your prediction for the end game of the US-China tech war?
Well, I think whether there would be a deal or not, or what kind of deal it is, we need to be ready to see a world that will be increasingly polarized, and basically with the bifurcation in supply chains, which could be about manufacturing, which could be about data flows. We do see more restriction everywhere. It could be about investment. So, I mean, I totally agree that in the future, if someone wants to tap into the Chinese market, it will be something that is made in China. And then if you need to want to tap on the rest of the world, then obviously there's different restriction that will make you not produce in China and somewhere else. So I think this sort of verification trend is unstoppable, and it seems to me that because of this grand competition between China and US, even though there may be some short-term relief on tariff, and I think one thing that is missing is really trust, right? Whether there would be a deal, whether the deal will be honored, or whether the tariff will actually come back 3 months later after a deal is signed. I think that will make basically the upcoming prediction or even the development or negotiation between the two countries very, very difficult. So I do see that the world will head towards two directions.
Yeah, but how do you, when you describe polarization, how about the other kind of like tech power in the world, like Europe? UK is a very powerful in terms of technology. South Korea, Japan. Do they have to pick sides, or they can have their own unique role in this new landscape?
Well, I think one problem is that a lot of these countries, they are very reliant on the US on security. So this is something beyond economics. Second, if we look at the economy, Japan, Korea, they all have a very high exposure towards US end demand. But at the same time, they also have still considerable exposure towards China's intermediate input. So which means that, yes, they're tapping on the US market at the same time. If they don't have the input from China, then they cannot also produce the products. So I think for some countries, it will be easier, like India. You don't even need to think, right? But for the other Asia countries, I think it will be quite difficult to maintain a balance between the two. But ultimately, because of the tech reliance, I think it will still lean a bit towards the US. But I mean, everyone is trying to very hard to find a balance. Some will find it easier than the others.
Thank you. Yeah, Xingmei, in terms of biotech industry, what will be the landscape between China and the US? What's your forecast?
I mean, I think China will definitely, this is also an area that the Chinese government has made a national priority. So we'll definitely see more investment going into biotech. Even though the US wants to target Chinese companies, wants to remove Chinese companies from their supply chain, I think there is still a lot of growth potential for these Chinese companies because, they can work with the rest of the world. Yes.
That's very good. So this brings the end to today's webinar. And thanks for staying with us. So for S&P readers who are interested in China tech, please once again reminded to follow China Future Tech. This is a one-stop site for all stories related to EV, AI, semiconductors, robotics, aerospace, and biotech. And for those who would like more from the usual S&P content, please also subscribe S&P Plus, a feature that provides insights and analysis of the stories behind the headlines. So once again, thank you for watching. See you next time.